Hello and welcome to Book Bites, a book club podcast for developers. This week we've recently finished up the Imposter's Handbook, a CS primer for self-taught programmers by Rob Conery, and he's here this week and we're going to talk to him about the book. So welcome to the show, Rob.
Thank you for having me.
So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Oh, man. Well, I have been working as a programmer and database administrator, writer, a whole bunch of stuff for the last 25 years, I guess. I'm self-taught completely. And I live here in Honolulu, Hawaii. I live with my family, my 2 daughters and my wife. And yeah, I try and write whenever I can. I currently work at Microsoft on the Azure team. I'm a cloud advocate. And I write on the weekends. And currently, I'm finishing up volume 2 of the Imposter's Handbook.
Okay, great. Is it going to be volume 2 or season 2?
Season 2. I keep saying volume, but I've been convinced to call it season. So yeah, season 2.
Nice. Yeah. I think it's the first book I've heard of that is written in seasons.
That was my co-author, Scott Hansel, and that was his idea.
Okay, cool. So how is it in Hawaii?
Right now it's loud. I'm in a warehouse that has been converted to a co-work space. It's a little bit loud, but no, generally it's nice. It's really muggy weather today, and I have to say it's nice and warm, and I love it.
Great.
Yeah, no jealousy at all.
Sorry.
So, Rob, in writing the Imposter's Handbook, do you have any personal experience with imposter syndrome?
Oh my gosh, yes, and that's why I wrote it. I mean, I'm really opinionated when it comes to reading a book or watching a video that someone's put together, and I hate the posturing, and that's the best word I can come up with. The kind of here's what I learned to do, and it's kind of this like I'm going to assume the role of the expert, and the parts that I cherish are when the author kind of drops into conversational mode where they become real. Like, oh my gosh, this one time, and I'll tell you a story, and I would gravitate towards that. So I found myself looking for authors that did that. And I forgot who I was reading. I think it was The Golden Braid, Gödel, Escher, Bach. I don't know if you've ever read that. It's an astounding book, and the author's voice is so clear throughout. And I was like, I want this, but I want this for just the basic computer science stuff that I don't know. Like, I always come back to Big O. And people talk about Big O, or people talk about complexity theory and NP hard problems. And I don't know what those are. And I thought, I wish I could find that book. And I was talking to a friend. They said, well, geez, Rob, you've been around in this industry long enough. You know how to write. Why don't you just write it? But I don't know it. That's the thing. And they said, all the better. You could learn it as you go. And so I did.
Cool. So you said this book began as a series of tasks in Wunderlist. So what were those tasks, and how exactly did that turn into a book?
I keep a weird, I guess it's not that weird, but my schedule is I start work around 7 in the morning. I take my kid to school, and then I come back and I just jump right at it. And I stop around 11:30 to 12, and then I have about 2.5 hour break in the afternoon. So I read stuff, I go for walks, sometimes I go in the water, and then I'm back at it from 3 until about 7 or 6 at night, depending. The reason I have that split schedule is because my brain just kind of stops working at around noon. And what I do instead is I'll go and I'll watch something that, for some reason, to me, learning something and then doing something are two totally different things. So what I did is I created this wonder list of things that I wanted to learn in the afternoon. And as I started researching these topics, I realized that not many people knew what they were talking about. You could just kind of tell. You guys know this from reading these tech books, right? You just know when the author is making stuff up. And so I was like, I don't know. So I just started jotting down these notes, and I kind of formalized it all. And I thought, well, this would actually make a really good blog post series, because when you start writing a blog post about these things, you're held to a higher level. Well, based on how willing you are to be wrong. And there's a lot of people out there who just write a blog post and say, I don't know if this is right or not. Whatever, here you go, post. And for me, I try and take it one step higher. So for me, a post is a more formalized way to learn something. And I started writing a few posts, and I thought, these topics are way too broad. And not only that, I'm kind of just like saying, well, I don't know about this one part, so I'll figure that out later. That's just not learning something fully. I forgot the exact topic that I was getting into at the time. But I just thought, I'm going to approach this as if someone has asked me to research it fully for like a book. And then that's when the light bulb just went off, because I was talking to friends about researching all this, and I was like, you know what? If I'm going to do it to this level, I can just become an investigative reporter. And so that's kind of what I did.
Cool.
So saying that a blog post is kind of formalizing something, or you take a position of authority. I mean, I feel like with a book, that's stepping it up even one more level. And I know specifically you wrote about Joel Spolsky being wrong about NP complete. After seeing that situation and writing a book about it, that just adds to the intimidation level for me. Or like I certainly feel like it would.
For some reason, I have a thing where I don't mind making a fool out of myself in front of people. In fact, a lot of people have told me that's something that I seek out, and I think there's truth to that. And I think it's because it is a practice in facing your fears. You know, what did I watch last night? I watched this wonderful movie called Elsie. Oh, no, I'm sorry, it's called Eighth Grade, and it was a movie about Elsie was the star's name. Anyway, she goes through this whole thing where she faces her fears, and it's just such a wonderful thing to watch. It's super cringy, and as what my daughter would say, and I love that. And so it was actually Jeff Atwood that stumbled on the NP thing, but watching his reaction to it and how he kind of faced up to it, I thought was really admirable. But then it kind of just fell off from there. Like, well, because all these people stood up and said, well, actually, NP complete has a very defined meaning, and they were right. And so Jeff was like, kind of shrugged, whatever. It's a blog post, get over it. And that was kind of his approach to this. And yeah, it's intimidating, but for me, I was like, what is this? You know, what caused these people to get so upset? And there's something here. And the thing that really got me is what made them so excited about this, you know, because it obviously means something to them. But what does it mean? And so that kind of just went from there. Are you going to ask me what NP complete means?
No.
No, not this time. But I am going to ask you, what section was the hardest to research?
Complexity theory. I rewrote that one. I think the last count was 8 times. I'll never forget. My brother's a computer science professor, and I would go to his house, you know, just to go see him. He lived, when I lived in Seattle, he was 5 hours away in Eugene. And I would sit with him, and oh my gosh, just repeatedly, he would just say, no, no, no. I'd say, okay, so we have NP hard, we have NP complete, we have, I repeat back to him, and he would just like, no, no, no. So this happened about, you know, every other month, you know, because I go down to visit my mom and visit him, and I'd update him on the section, and he'd read it over, and he'd just throw it at me, literally, you know, just throw it at me. And so what I was trying to do is I was trying to take this incredibly complex topic and boil it down to something that I felt people could understand, and then cat drawings, you know. And I finally locked onto something, and he kind of nodded. He said, okay, I think you got it there. So that was the hardest.
Cat drawings are always appreciated.
That's what I figured.
So you said you kind of want to expose your thought process and not pose as an expert, but at the same time take this incredibly complex subject and boil it down to something simple. What is the goal of the book? What do you hope people get out of it? And there may be multiple goals.
I mean, the goal, I suppose, is to feel the power of knowledge, how that can transform you. For instance, I'm starting my second stint at Microsoft now, and I'm still intimidated as heck by the people that are in the room. You know, just the extreme knowledge that everybody has, right? The first time I was there, I just would never open my mouth. I mean, just the people that were in the room, wow. And, you know, I remember sitting across from Scott Goo, and he'd ask me a question. And I was like, I don't even know how to answer this guy. Like, he's one of the smartest people I've ever met. This time around, I feel like I have a lot more grounding. And, you know, when people talk about certain things, I can keep up with the conversation. In fact, funny little anecdote, I was at a conference recently with one of the people that I consider one of the smartest people in the room, right? And they were talking about complexity theory and the backpack problem. And they made a comment about how it's, you know, not solvable. And I kind of said, you mean solvable in polynomial time? I kind of corrected them. And they're like, well, yes, that's right. And I, you know, of course, everybody looked at me like, wow, check out Rob, Mr. Smarty Pants over there. But the point is, like, the feeling that you're a part of something as opposed to being apart from it, if that makes sense. That's what I hope the goal is. People can not feel isolated. And I think that's really destructive, that isolated feeling you get at work when you just feel like, I don't know what I'm doing. And I don't know, here you go. I don't really know what I'm doing. It's a really destructive thing.
I think for me, one of the valuable pieces that I got out of the book was in the earlier chapters in the discussion about history of computing, because I recall going through university and learning about some of those topics really briefly, but my whole focus was like trying to get some assignment done, like trying to get an XSLT transform done by the time that class started the next day. And so I really like glossed over those things, and like being able to go back and look at that history from like a perspective of 10 years later after school, like you can really see like where the influence like still stands, whether it be like punch cards, and then now looking at like we still have 80 character limits in our terminals because of some of those things like that. And when you were digging at those sources of history, like what inspired you to pick out, I guess, some of the particular topics within the history of computing? Because obviously there are so many things that are involved along that timeline.
Oh man, that's a great question. I had two tracks going when I was taking all my notes. So the first track was just all about machines and computation. And that's what I decided to go with, because my main topics were computation and complexity theory, and I wanted to lean into big O and algorithms and all that stuff. So there's a natural arc there as far as the story goes. But the other branch that I decided to wait until volume 2, which is coming out soon, is information theory. And Claude Shannon, who so many people don't know who Claude Shannon is. Do you guys know who Claude Shannon is?
No.
Nope.
Wow. It's one of those things that once you read about this guy, you just want to kick yourself. That's why I did. So anyway, I can go off on that later if you want to. But so I had this whole other track going where, how do you turn information into binary, into bits and bytes, and how does it get translated by our programs? And I found that just didn't work into the first book. But the history of it all, really, to me, is so, so, so important for so many reasons, right? Because it makes you realize that what we do today, as everyone says, standing on the shoulders of giants, to use a massive cliche, but it's true. And you realize like what you're doing is I don't know, pushing further the industry. It kind of gives you a different perspective as opposed to sitting down and slogging through like forms over data or whatever you're doing. In a lot of ways, you're participating in this great experiment of pushing this industry forward. And I think if you know the history and where we've come over the last 80 years or 100 years, it gives you that perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of which, I'm actually totally going to shamelessly plug myself in that I just had a conversation with Michael Chan for the React podcast about the history of computing and how it leads back to punch cards being mimicking Jacquard loom cards that were used in order to create patterns for clothing. And being the knit code monkey, this actually plays really heavily into my own textile history as well. So, being able to go over some of that history was really fun to go over. I didn't get the computer science degree growing up, so a lot of the stuff that I knew from those chapters is stuff that I'd researched on my own because of my own sheer interest. So it was really cool seeing the things that I'd researched like brought together into like one major chapter to be able to tie all of those pieces together and bring them into the future. And one of the comments that, we kind of came across as far as that one podcast goes is that, the technologies that we identify and associate with something very small, if we take that step back, we can take that history and we can take what we've learned from those and end up expanding it and applying it to a much larger swath of the universe, essentially. And being able to do that allows us to interact with the world differently. And that's something that's been really cool going through that book, is the fact that the more I learn, the more I find that I can apply that outside of not just development, but also life.
Well, yeah, get this. You're going to like this, I think. I hope. In the next season here of the book that I'm writing, as I mentioned, I started researching information. And I started from as they say, from the very, very beginning. source of logic, all the way from Aristotle. How do we get to binary and representing data in bits and bytes? But the one thing I just wanted to bring up, because of what you said, is the story of George Boole, where we get Boolean. George Boole was a self-taught mathematician and incredibly, incredibly brilliant mind. And what he did is he translated Aristotle's rules of logic into pure mathematics using representation of logic. And we take for granted the idea of true false today and what you can do with it. But he formalized the notion of and or, XOR, and all those things. And he did this because he was literally an imposter. No one was there to tell him this is the formal mathematician's route. He just didn't know. He was self-taught. But get this, his goal was that he wanted to mathematically understand the mind of God. So he sat down and he tried to logically propose how God's mind and God's work translated into the world around him. One of his big things is trying to understand the Irish potato famine. He couldn't understand why that would happen. And he wanted to see if God was good or evil or what. And so he laid out this massive logical proposition using ands and ors and XORs and this notation. And it's an utterly astounding read. And it stayed parked in the realm of mathematics, kind of just stayed parked for a while until Turing got a hold of it later on. And a man by the name of Claude Shannon, who looked at what Boole had done and said, you know what? We can take George Boole's work in the area of symbolic mathematics, true and false. We can actually make circuits out of this. And we can combine these circuits to actually make decisions for us. That, to me, is one of the greatest untold stories of computer science. I mean, it's told, I shouldn't say that, but it's one of the least recognized, because everybody looks at Turing as, the father of the digital computer, but no one really recognizes Claude Shannon as the one direct source of the entire information age. It's an absolutely wonderful story, what that man has done. And that's just one thing that he did. There's so much more, but I could take up hours of your podcast by telling you all about it.
You're getting me all excited for season 2. I got to go jump on that pre-order. I did have some questions like related to both the process on this and like how it's going to change with season 2 as well. And like one thing in particular was with creating the sketches in it. Are those something that you created along the way? You did like post authoring like the text of it, or right in line? Like what was your strategy on that front?
I'm a huge fan of XKCD. One of the things I love is infographics, and the way Randall Munroe, that's his name, I was grasping for it, the way he'll condense these amazing ideas into these panels and make a joke out of it. And I think that's pretty gifted. Anyway, so what I tried to do is when I was coming up with these analogies, I thought, well, let's see if we can draw it, use a different part of my brain. So I did it at the same time. If I don't try and draw something when I'm writing about it, I'll lose whatever little bit of fire is in there in my head, creative fire, if you will. The muse will have left, as they say. So I'll write it right in line.
Yeah, have you read some of Randall Munroe's books, like Thing Explainer?
Mm-hmm. My daughter loves that book.
Yeah, it's incredible, explaining these super complicated things with the 1,000 most common English words. And so, in a way, that's what your book is doing, although you're not limiting your vocabulary. Yeah,
my brain. So I actually brought up Thing Explainer in season 2 book, again, because of Claude Shannon. And it has to do with entropy and word choice and information and all this stuff. And not a lot of people realize the feat that Randall Munroe pulled off with that. Because when you talk about the 1,000 most common words, you're also talking about the 1,000 words that have least information. When you think about entropy is the gauge of surprise, or how much information a set of binary bytes might have, whatever message you're sending. And so Randall chose to use these words. And the only way he could do this, and this is such a study in information theory, the only way he could do this was to use drawings. And so I just loved that he underscored his drawings with words that were approachable. And anyway, I'm going off again on season 2, but it's, to me, I love that. And I thought about it a lot when I was doing my drawings. I thought, it's interesting that I was struggling to find words, and I used pictures.
Well, you might as well do a tangent on Claude Shannon since you mentioned them twice.
Well, it would be.
Or is
It
that
would
a
be
spoiler?
okay. No, it's not a spoiler at all. I'll tell you what. I don't know if you guys take recommendations for your podcast, but there's a book called A Mind to Play: How Claude Shannon Invented Information Theory or the Information Age. Absolutely mind-blowing book. I listened to it on Audible during a drive, and I just was transfixed by this man. So basically, Claude Shannon did two things. He took the work of George Boole, and he realized that you could make circuits electrically. And up to that point, circuits were done manually by using like a switchboard. He worked at Bell Labs, and he was trying to come up with a way to make a better phone switchboard so operators didn't have to pull out plugs and plug things back in. And so he said, you know what, we can do this with circuits and just carefully construct them. And you can do all kinds of things. And then he was pulled in to work on mechanical computers during the war to calculate ballistic trajectories. And it was fascinating. These room-sized computers that I mentioned in the first season of the book, these room-sized computers that would calculate these things over a span of days. And within 10 years, they were completely obsoleted by Shannon's digital computer. When you think about Turing and his bomb, right, his Christopher from the movie, that only worked because of Shannon's designs. In fact, Shannon and Turing were friends. Not a lot of people know that. It's kind of interesting, all that whole thing. So that's the first thing he did. The second thing he did, which is actually more transcendent, he kicked off the information age with one of his most amazing papers ever, where he talked about trying to send a message from one place to another, and described networking and described how you could use binary to send a message from one place to another with no loss in fidelity of the message. He showed how to do error correction, because at that time, the only thing you could do was telegraph, and telegraph over wires has resistance and atmospheric interference and all that kind of stuff. Well, Shannon said, well, if you send things in binary encoded in this way, you'll actually reduce the errors to negligible and have greater fidelity. And that just turned the entire everything upside down. So when I was a kid, I remember this when they replaced analog circuits with digital circuits. And it took that long to do, but I remember all of a sudden vocal clarity was like, whoa! And maybe you remember this from years ago when they did it with cell towers. Phones used to be analog, and then all of a sudden they turned digital and the clarity went straight through the roof. This is all Claude Shannon. This is all from one paper. And it's nuts how important this person is to who we are and what we do. I would say, a lot of people have said he's the Einstein of the digital revolution, and they're right. A lot of people have said he's actually more important than Einstein. And the one reason that we don't know about him, the main reason that a lot of people think we don't know about him, is because he just didn't have an ego. He was a quiet man, and he did not want to be bothered. So he stayed to himself. It's like Willy Wonka.
Yeah. Talking about that binary encoding and being able to like losslessly transmit things, I am somewhat new, I guess about a little over a year into having a ham radio license, and there's a big deal right now going on called FT8, where they are able to go and like you repetitively go and spew something like a digital message out, and even in like a really noisy environment like that I live in, I am able to have like a 20-foot antenna and like reach places over in like Europe in bad conditions. And I think in the past you've said that you had ham radio involvement like long ago, or even, I don't know what your state is today.
Me? No, I've never done ham radio.
Must have been somebody else, but it's very much in line with that. And there's a big stir about it right now called FT8. So if you're looking something like on that sort of topic, definitely would recommend checking it out.
Cool. Thank you.
All right. Well, I've got some questions from Twitter.
Mm-hmm.
Heather Downing at Coraline or Corlin said, find it. Do you know her?
I know Heather, yes.
Okay. She said, I find it excellent on so many levels. Regularly recommend it during my own imposter syndrome talk at conferences. What I would ask is, how do you know when you've learned enough to be valuable?
That's a good question. How do you measure your own value? That's a much deeper question, I think. If you can feel centered, sitting in the chair that you're in a room, and you feel like you can raise your voice and offer something and then back it up, I mean, that's the only measure that I have personally. for instance, right now I have a Slack window open with the people I'm working with at Microsoft, and they're talking about a bunch of stuff, and I feel like I can wade right in there and do it. At here, this is what I think, right? Blast the channel with stuff, and feel okay with that, because I feel like if questions were asked, I could answer them. It's the only way I can even address this. I mean, it's such a tough industry, and I think if you embrace, and this is again cliche, but if you embrace the notion of failure as a good teacher, and that you surround yourself with people that catch you when you fail, and that they want you to try, that is a good place to be. And I think that's when you can start measuring your value, because as long as they'll catch you, maybe that's the measure. Being in a place where people will catch you, that's when you're valuable.
Let's see if you know this person also, because this question may be kind of a joke. I'm not sure. It says, the name is The Coin Must Flow. The user handle is at Dennis A. Landy.
No.
Nope. Okay. Question is, who wrote it, really? I don't know. I don't know what to do with that.
Who wrote it, really? Yeah, it was all me. It's funny because I page through it sometimes, and I see all the chapters. It's like, whoa. I mean, because I've been separated from it enough over the last few months. I used to go in there daily and tweak stuff, and I don't do that anymore. And at first, I'm like, dang, man, that is a lot. That is a lot of stuff you wrote. And then, other times then I get hauled through the memories of, 18 months. That's what it took. Writing and rewriting and rewriting and rewriting and rewriting. It was all me.
Yeah. Was that full time?
Yes and no. I would take periods of, I would take breaks. I think, the fact that I accidentally put it on pre-sale, it really helped. I was on the Skype call with my friend, Scott Hanselman. He was telling him about it, and I was actually asking him a question, like, what would you say about this? And he was looking through the PDF that I sent him, and he said, well, I put it on pre-sale and just going to kind of hover there to see what people think quietly. And unfortunately, I said the word quietly 5 seconds too late, because he said, whoops, well, it's out there now. And he tweeted it. And I'm like kind of catching my breath right now, because I'm remembering that moment where I almost threw up. I mean, I was like seeing like Twitter was going bonkers. My sales literally spiked, and I'd never had that happen to me before. And they just kept on spiking. And next thing I'm reading, Mark Andreessen bought it, and Werner Vogels from Amazon bought it. And I'm like, dude, what did you do to me? So yeah.
No pressure.
Yeah, good and bad. A lot of people are like, this is not done. I'm like, right. It's not done. And a couple people were kind of, a little jumpy about that, and I tried to quickly say, pre-sale, as it says, pre-sale, and I probably should have worded it to be a little bit different, but whatever.
Nice. Well, you did it.
I did it. I'm still here.
Another question from Twitter is from Robert Tables at Dexter Point Dexter. What if I'm not just a person with imposter syndrome and genuinely just suck at the thing I'm supposed to be good at?
Jeez. What if you're just a bad programmer? I don't know. I mean, I think if that is a good self-assessment, then you feel good about that, then sure, maybe a different line of work is good for you. I mean, I don't know. I have friends who constantly go around mumbling how crappy of a programmer they are. And it's kind of just their MO. It's their thing. They need that. They need to wear that like a jacket or a badge, And I don't know, I'll always say, I'll put my arm around them and say, if you're looking for me to prop you up, I've got you. But I'm not going to convince you that you're a good programmer. It's just not what I'm going to do. Because obviously you are, because you're here at this conference speaking, So I don't know. There's a lot of people out there that kind of enjoy self-loathing. I'm not into that.
Yeah, it's interesting. All right, that's it for the Twitter questions.
Cool.
You talked about going in and making lots of tweaks all the time to the book. And I know one of the things that you did was use GitHub as an errata. And how was that experience for you?
It was really challenging, especially in the beginning when that huge splash hit. I don't want to step into a controversy, but I'll tell you about it just because of the sake of controversy. The Jeff Atwood quote, I had to go in and tweak quickly, because Jeff's quote So for those who don't know, there's a quote in the beginning of the book that I centered the entire book around. It was a comment on Jeff Atwood's blog about being disastrously wrong. And Jeff had written a post about how do you know if a problem's NP complete? And he used a quote to illustrate his point. And his quote was from Chief Justice, somebody or other, U.S. Supreme Court, that had to do with pornography and smut. And the Chief Justice said, I can't define it, but I know it when I see it. Something along those lines. I can't define hardcore pornography, but I know it when I see it. Which is actually kind of funny, but that became a legal definition for these things. So Jeff used it in the context of this. They don't know what NP complete is, but I know it when I see it. So anyway, he had referenced hardcore pornography, and I had quite a few people flip out on me, saying, when I say quite a few, the numbers between 10 and 100, let's put it that way, who pinged me about that. Do you really need to use the words hardcore pornography in the foreword of your book? And I said, that's actually Chief Justice of the United States that said that. And it's a quote that it's not even my words, it's Jeff Atwood's. And one guy just was, just up in arms and swore at me. A little irony there. So there's, this is before the Me Too movement, but well in the middle of all of the tech stuff surrounding gender roles and everything. And I just thought, best to take it out. I don't want to, I just don't want to kick a hornet's nest. So that was good because all of that took place on GitHub. And there's messages that were there for everybody to see. They saw my reactions to it. So I guess I enjoyed that. On more positive end of things, I had a lot of people, and when I say negative, I only meant negative because a lot of people got upset. I don't mind taking that quote out. On the more positive side, wow, I had some people that just really assumed editorial roles in this. They would go through and like page numbers and everything. You do this and do this, do this, do this. That was great. I mean, I couldn't believe how many people pitched in to help out.
Do you think you would do the same for season 2?
I am. In fact, the GitHub issue is up there right now. This time, however, when I'm writing the book, I'm not using what I'd used before. I'm using Word, if you can believe it. It just makes me laugh. I hate Word. And I'm using it to write a book. So those two things go hand in hand. But I have to say, it's an incredible writing resource. And I'm not saying that because I work at Microsoft. It actually took place before I got the job. But the way it catches so many grammatical and spelling errors that I don't have people assaulting my issues list with grammar and spelling, which is very nice.
What did you use last time?
I used about 8 different things. So I started out using Markdown and Middleman, and I followed a format that I had used before in a project that the guys that wrote Meteor.js, Get to Know Meteor, I forgot what it was called, but it's like a Meteor book, and they did it all in Middleman and Markdown. I used that until I just did not have what I needed it to have, like figures and footnotes and whatnot. So I went from there into about 20 other things. I have a huge list. I used Scrivener. I used Word at one time. Just everything I tried to do just was horrid. And what I finally ended up doing was just pulling everything into Word for the third time, letting the formatter just do what it wanted to do, because that was a big thing for me, is the visual format, and then pulling all of that text into Adobe InDesign, and that was where I put the final touches on the layout. And I finally got parity, reasonable parity, between EPUB, PDF, and Mobi. And wow, was that hard. And it's because that's the thing, is InDesign is not a writer's tool. It's a book designer's tool. Word is a writer's tool. So, yeah.
I know that having them aligned across a few different platforms is something that I've seen Zed Shaw complain about a handful of times with his books. So.
And I know your readers or your listeners out there are going to be saying, Rob, have you tried? Yes, I promise you I've tried it. I swear to you I've tried it. I've tried, you would not believe, I've been considered about 30 things maybe. Anyway.
Yeah. I'm just always interested in what different authors use.
I tried to use Google Docs for this one. I started out because I have an editor who I love, Diane Fay. Diane, I love you. She's amazing. So I decided to write it and have her just kind of sit shotgun on the whole thing and help me out. But I realized she's so good. She would just jump in there and start tweaking things. And I realized I couldn't couldn't like lock in and go, because I was always kind of adjusting with her edits. So I was like, I'm going to take this to Word and like just keep it here. It was a much faster experience, and Word, the outlines and everything in Word. I went with that, and I stayed there, and that's been the best choice ever.
Nice. I think we wanted to jump into some other topics besides the book as well. Jason, did you have some questions about this developer's life?
I definitely did. So, Rob, I am a big fan of this developer's life. There was one that I listened to like long ago, and I just recall it being awesome. And so it's definitely a tangent from the book, but I guess firstly, like, what kicked off the idea even for you?
I was sitting on my lanai, having a beer after work, and the rain was coming down. I'll remember this perfectly. The rain was coming down, and I was so happy just sitting there and listening to This American Life. And I thought, I just love stories. Stories teach so well, right? And I mean, you've heard me say it before. I have such a problem with technical podcasts and books and videos in general. Like, I can't stand the expert ego. I can't stand like the panel of dudes usually sitting there yucking and clucking about their weekends, 10 minutes before they get to it. And I appreciate that about This American Life. They jump right into a story. Ira Glass's things, he just doesn't say anything except for the story. That's how he starts, because that's the important thing. And I just sat there listening to that going, I wish we had this. And I jumped up and I ran downstairs and I called Sarah Chips, a friend of mine, and she lives in New York. And I said, Sarah, will you record something with me? And she's sure. What were we talking about? I'm like, tell me about when you got fired. Because to me, I wanted to hear like a confessional, like something real, human, grounding. I don't want to hear posturing. I don't want to hear the thing you hear all the time. And so as she was talking, we had a good few laughs. And I thought, well, I mean, seriously, I was just playing around. I'm going to add some music to this and see if I can do This American Life. And what I came up with was actually kind of fun. And I sent it to a few friends and I said, sound cheesy. Because that's the thing I was really worried about is cheese. And they said, no, you should put it out there. So I did. And next thing I know, they said, do another one. So I did. And then I got a call from Hanselman, and he's like, can I join you on this? And I said, what? I mean, for those of you who don't know who he is, he's a super famous podcaster and speaker, and he's just an overall good person. And so I was like, of course, yes, sir. And so it just went from there.
Yeah, Scott Hanselman isn't exactly someone that you say, nah, it's okay.
Yeah.
So there's a lot going on in, the technical education space between screencasts and books and paid newsletters and podcasts and all of these things. What do you think the future of your industry looks like?
Wow. I don't know. It is interesting how sometimes a book will just work. Again, I'll bring up Gödel, Escher, Bach. That's another one you guys should review if you haven't. I'm sorry if I don't know, but that is a tough read. But when it's one of those books that you curl up with and and you turn on a light and you have some tea and you just soak into it, I can't imagine that as a video. I can't imagine it as an audiobook. No way. I mean, the words are just beautiful. Everything about it is beautiful. But then, other times, like, I just want to learn quickly. Like, what was that thing about Docker Swarm again? Okay, jump on YouTube. You just scroll through. Yes, you. Oh God, no. Okay, this one works. And then so video. Sometimes you just need a 10-minute video. Peep Code is one of my favorite resources ever for this exact thing. Condensed, straight to the point, visuals that work together with the audio. So, long way around to answering your story or answering your question. I do not know. I imagine someone's going to finally synthesize a way to have maybe an interactive EPUB that works across devices that has both audio, video, and text. So I don't know, maybe that'll be a new format that gets embraced.
Oh, there was just going back to season 2, we have one more panelist who's not able to make it today, and she had a specific question, and that was that you added a chapter on cryptocurrencies in season 2, and she asked, like, how are you going to approach talking about the misunderstood topic of cryptocurrency?
So far what I did is, the only reason I added it is because it was just a natural evolution of information. I went through encryption. I went through as I mentioned, networking and a bunch of stuff, and ended up in cryptography and hashing and the uses of it. And like, it's a natural leap to then say we are now going to be transacting money with it, and it's fascinating. So I just talked about it from that grounding level of like the inspiration Satoshi had when he came up with Bitcoin and the technology that went into it, which I am a huge fan of. I'm a huge fan of the technology, not a huge fan of the hype. But I just basically laid out what the technology is, what the problems that the paper solved were. And then I said, here's the practical issues with it. Here's the societal issues with it, both sides. And, pros and cons. I said, what do we do from here? Where do we go? I don't know, but as a technologist, as a programmer, is that something, I need to worry about? Which I think is a good question. I'm not being rhetorical with that. Is it something that I need to really consider? I mean, obviously, you don't want to propel something that's soaking up the energy grid. But at the same time, the idea of cryptocurrency and not having control over a transaction and what people are spending money on, is that a good thing? I don't know.
So you started this company called TechPub, right?
Mm-hmm.
And eventually sold it to Pluralsight. And now you've got a thing called Big Machine. What is that exactly?
Well, it was just basically a corporation I used to sell my book. And then I started just doing more videos and more things with it. I never really intended to go out on my own again, but I did. And yeah. And so I decided that instead of doing cutting edge stuff, which I usually did with TechPub to try and keep people up with what's coming, I decided to do more basic stuff. I also did some cutting edge stuff, but yeah, it's basically books and videos. And I don't know, I kind of just tailor making stuff to whatever subject I was working on. So for instance, Elixir is in there, or was in there. I had a book and a video set. Same with Firebase, but I have one on going solo as a contractor, which I did all video because it just didn't fit a book format. So I kind of just left it open to be whatever it was going to be.
Yeah. So is there something in you that just always wants to create these things that teach people, whether it's videos or books or whatever?
Yeah, I suppose. I mean, I just enjoy sharing things, and I suppose I get that from my dad and my mom. They were both teachers, and my dad always loved to share a story. He was always into that, and I love stories, and I love learning new things. And when you go, like, for me, it was like reading Michael Crichton books when I was a kid or in college, and I remember just like reading these books and getting into like chaos theory or whatever the thing of the day was. It's just like, whoa, I learned something and I read a great story at the same time. That's really cool. And so, yeah, I love that, and watching Peep Code again was a great inspiration because I loved the way he wrapped these subjects up. It's Jeffrey Grossenbach, wrapped these subjects up in a really cool story and really slick production. You had a good time watching it. You spent 40 to 50 minutes, on a Sunday afternoon, and you learned something new.
Yeah, I think it really sticks with you when it's wrapped up in a story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was talking to a friend about that specific thing, and they made a quip like, well, I wish somebody could do that with Google's Bigtable or, I don't know, Cosmos DPI is some big thing. And I said, we could have like a really cool story surrounding just databases in general. And I said, yes, so many people I know don't understand what it's like, working with a database. They always think like, how do I write a SQL query? Well, it's so much more than that. I'm like, oh man, that would be a fun thing to do. So I did. This is funny because this fit a book, right? I actually wrote a bit of a science fiction book about working with databases, a first-person perspective of how I learned how to work with a database, which is with my pants on fire, because the developers split and we didn't have anybody to work with a database. And it's actually, at the time, it was SQL Server and 6.5, and I had to learn how to write a stored procedure. In fact, I had to learn how to write a bunch of them, and then also to get SQL Server up and hosted somewhere. And I had no idea what I was doing. So I remember just hitting the books and talking to friends, and next thing I know, I'm a DBA. Like, okay. So anyway, yeah, I wrote a book about that, and it was really fun.
Is that still available?
Yeah, it's called A Curious Moon, and so I guess I can just do a quick blurb, but what I decided to do was, part of my shtick with Big Machine is that I have this fake aerospace company called Red 4. It's an aerospace startup, and one of our competitors is SpaceX. So I kind of use that storyline bleeding throughout my stuff. But this is about an intern named D, who joins Red 4 for the summer, but is pulled in because the database administrator left. And so they are trying to collate and query and load up and so on all the data from the Cassini mission. And so I went and grabbed all the data from the Cassini mission, and I loaded it into Postgres, and I went through the steps of normalizing it, cleansing it, having to figure out what's good and what's bad, and then basically ended the book by doing the query for finding out if there's life under the ice of this moon of Saturn called Enceladus, which is one of the massive mysteries. In fact, I don't know if you guys know this, but Enceladus is right now the primary moon that they think that, you know, there might be life under there for a lot of reasons. We go into those reasons in the book, and it was a ton of fun to write. So yeah.
So, following up on that story and the fact that I'm a total space nerd, can you tell the story of the cover image that you used for your book?
Yeah. So the cover images I used, they're all from JPL, and they commissioned these artists to capture the imagination of the things, present-day space exploration, if you will. So the one that I used, I forget the name of it. It's in the forward of the book, but it's basically a person skydiving into one of the massive gravity wells of this planet that I guess is supposed to be Earth-like. And when I saw that picture, I was like, oh my gosh, it's just so feels like, you know, what it's like to not know something and to just kind of try and learn it, and to try and, like, you know, when I worked at Microsoft, like, sit in a room with people and share your opinion when you know that you're outclassed. And the great thing I loved about that image was the jumper didn't have a parachute, and that's just what it felt like. So I actually kind of doctored the image and put the cover of the book recursively on the jumper's back, because recursion plays a big part in the book itself. And for the second book, the Curious Moon book, I used again the JPL's image of Enceladus, and I doctored it up a little bit. So yeah, and those are all public domain images.
Jumping from the first image on the cover of the book all the way to the last one, that was one that I looked at and just had to ask you on. Was it depicts a person standing on a stage, holding a mask in their hand, taking it off, standing there with a computer that says stuff on it, and then there's a crowd of people watching them. What was your choice and motivation behind that specific picture?
Posturing. You know, I find that when people don't know something, or they don't feel secure in what they know, they will posture. It's a human response, right? It's I find it particularly with the speaking crowd. And I don't want to sound negative when I say it, but, you know, you can always spot the people who have learned the hard way and are sharing their stories versus the people that are hired to be evangelists, and they need to posture as experts, right? And my goal with this book was, you know, knowledge will give you the ability to take off that mask and to let people see your true self in your face and what you do know, and to feel good about it, and to stand in front of a crowd and to kind of square within yourself, and, you know, square your shoulders up, if you will, and look them straight in the eye and say, I know this. You know, maybe I don't know it as well as I should, but I know it well enough to stand up here and share with you my experience.
Nice. Well, thanks so much for coming on the show. Where can people go to find out more about you and buy some of your stuff?
Well, my stuff for sale is at bigmachine.io. Spelled big as in like machine, and .io. My blog is rob.conery.io. My last name is Conery, so it's rob.conery, like that. I'm not blogging as much as I should, but I will be starting another one soon on Elixir. Just a quick thing. I used to have an Elixir tutorial, once again, using Red 4 and space stuff. I had to take it down because it got a little dated, but I plan on updating it in the near future with some stuff I'm doing for the Azure team and Elixir. So it's going to be kind of fun.
All right, and you're on Twitter as well?
I'm on Twitter, at Rob Conery.
Yep. All right, well, thank you so much for taking the time out to talk with us.
Thank you.
Appreciate it, Rob.